Today we are starting from almost the beginning, in the sense that we are going to talk about the Buddha and the practice of the Dhamma begins with taking the refuge. We just recited Buddhaṃ Saraṇaṃ Gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ Saraṇaṃ Gacchāmi, Saṅghaṃ Saraṇaṃ Gacchāmi. So that means we take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma and the Saṅgha. That is the starting point of the practice. And so we start today with this. You have been given some translations of this from the Bhikkhu Bodhi's book, but I am reading from the translation of the Polytext Society, London, which I think is a better translation of that. But still, it is important to think of the Buddha in this way. Here this sutra says, the Buddha says in this sutra, monks, there is one person whose birth into the world is for the welfare of many folk, for the happiness of many folk, who is born out of compassion for the world, for the profit, welfare and happiness of devas and mankind. So this is a very important statement. So this person, he says, who is that one person? It is a Tathagata who is an Arahant, a fully enlightened one. This monks is that one person. So that this means that the appearance of the Buddha is a rare occurrence, and that occurrence is of great benefit for mankind, not only for mankind, but even for the devas. The question arises, who are these devas? So here we have to understand that in other religions they speak of gods, and these gods are supposed to be supernatural beings living in a supernatural world called heaven. it is very important to understand the difference between that belief and these devas that the Buddha speaks of. And the devas are not supernatural beings. Devas are natural beings who are living in the world that we are aware of. That means in this universe that today even the scientists, especially the astronomers who have been looking at the universe using very powerful telescopes, and they are not only aware of what we normally see as the sun and the moon and even the stars, that is the universe that scientists are speaking about. So it is in that same universe that these devas are beings that are living. Now today the scientists are still trying to find out whether there are other worlds, whether there are other beings living in this universe. But they have not found any other beings other than the human beings on this planet Earth and even the animals on this planet Earth. But here the Buddha is speaking about the devas who are living in this universe. And he has pointed out that these devas are within this solar system. We speak of a solar system, and the solar system means in ancient times people didn't know much about the solar system, but today they talk about the solar system as all the planets that are going round the sun. And what we call the moon is going round the earth. And apart from these planets known to the astronomers, the planets that are going round the sun, there are other planets that are invisible to the human eye. And today the scientists are beginning to detect some things which are invisible but somehow appears to be present. Now these devas are those beings who are living in those invisible planets, which are also going round the sun. And they are not only just beings living in those invisible planets, they even come to speak to the Buddha. And sometimes they come and ask questions from the Buddha, and the Buddha gives answers. Sometimes the Buddha has been able to even go to those worlds. Not only the Buddha, even some of the disciples who had gained psychic powers, they have been able to go and speak to those devas. But they are not supernatural beings, they are also natural beings. Now they speak, the modern scientists, they not only speak of the solar system, they are aware of more than this solar system. They point out that there are many solar systems. There are many suns, and the stars that we see in the sky, the twinkling stars, not the planets. These stars are really suns, and there are planets moving around those suns, and that there are many such solar systems circling round a center, and such a collection of solar systems turning round a center is what is called a galaxy. Now they are even able to notice many such galaxies, not only one galaxy. And the Buddha points out that at the center of the galaxy is what is called the Brahma world. The Brahma the Maha Brahma is the chief of the world at the center of the galaxy. And the Buddha even talks about several such galaxies. And those galaxies also turn round centers. And today the astronomers are aware even of that. And they talk about what are called clusters of galaxies. The cluster of galaxy means several galaxies turning round a center. Now this the Buddha has been talking about. So it is very important to understand that the presence of a Buddha is of great benefit not only to the human beings in this human world, but even to those devas who are in those worlds. So the Buddha is not a simple person. That is very important to understand. Now the Buddha says further, monks, the manifestation of one person is hard to be found in the world. Of what person? Of a Tathagata who is an Arahant. Hard to be found in the world is such a person. So the manifestation of a Tathagata is a very rare occurrence. Then he says, monks, one person born into the world is an extraordinary person. And that is also a Tathagata. Now, Tathagata, the word Tathagata is also an interesting word. Which, of course, goes into the teachings of the Buddha. The Pali word tat means that. The English word that. We have the English word that. What is the that? That means what we perceive through the senses. What we see, or what we hear, or what we smell, or what we touch. That is the object that we perceive. That is what is called that. The object of perception is the that. There is an ancient Sanskrit term which is commonly recited by the Hindus. Tat Tvam Asi. Tat Tvam Asi. But they just put everything together and say Tattvamasi. But these are three words. Tat, Tvam, Asi. Tat means that. Tvam means you. Asi means is or are. Is the singular, are is the plural. Tattvamasi means you are that. Did you understand that? It says you are that. What does that mean? You are that means you are the subject, that is the object. That means the subject is the object, or the object and subject are one. We normally think that the subject and object are two different things. But that statement, Tattvamasi, means that the subject and the object is the same. Although this statement is used by the Hindus today, that really comes from the Buddha. Tattvamasi. You are that. Now that statement is what we call awakening from the dream of existence. The object that we perceive is a creation of our mind. That is what it means. The object that we perceive is a creation of the mind. That means, although we see a world outside as an object, that is really inside. Today the modern scientists are aware that our eye works like a camera. Both eyes are two cameras. And when we take a picture with the camera, where is the picture? The picture is inside the camera. So in the same way, when we open our eyes and see something, what we see is inside here, not there. But we see it like it is there. We see it like something outside. This is mainly because we have two eyes. If we had only one eye, we would not see it as something outside. Because we have two eyes, and this is what is called the three-dimensional view. It is this three-dimensional view that makes us think that this is something outside. The three-dimensional view comes from the presence of two eyes. If we close one eye and look, we don't really see the distance. So modern scientific thinking proves what the Buddha is saying, that the whole world that we are aware of is really something inside us. This is why a certain deva once came to the Buddha and asked a question. This deva says, if a person can travel at a very high speed in space, now today, according to the modern scientists, the highest speed is the velocity of light. That's what they say. The velocity of light is the highest speed. And that, so here the Buddha, the Deva is asking this question, if we can travel at a very high speed, will we be able to reach the end of the world? That's what was the question. The Buddha said, no. We cannot reach the end of the world by traveling at high speed. Then this Deva says, how true what you said. Because before I was a Deva, I was a human being in this human world. And I was a yogi. And I had psychic powers. And with this psychic power, I could travel in space at a very high speed. He didn't speak of the velocity of light, but he said that speed he explained by saying that just in a fraction of a second, he could go from the one end of the world to the other end. That's how we showed the velocity. So somehow he had this ability to travel in space with his psychic powers. And he traveled for 100 years, he said. But at the end of the 100 years, he died. he couldn't finish the distance. So the Buddha said, without reaching the end of the world, you cannot bring suffering to an end. You have to reach the end of the world. And then he said, the world, the beginning of the world, the end of the world, and the way leading to the end of the world is in this fathom-long body itself, with its perception and conception. In other words, we are born with 5 senses, and it is through the senses that we begin to perceive a thing called a world. That is all within the body. And the world that we see as outside is actually a concept in the mind. This is a very interesting thing. You know, I have stated this earlier, that there is a time or period in the history of Western civilization which is called the Age of Enlightenment, and that is the 18th century. The 18th century is the Age of Enlightenment according to the Western thinking. That was the time when science began. All the scientists like Isaac Newton, Galileo, and so many other people like that who came up was in the 18th century. Now 18th century is the 1700s. So during this 18th century, people were able to think about things, because it was during this 18th century that thinking, rational thinking started. And people were able to understand that this world that we are aware of was not a creation of a God, that everything that happens in this world happens only due to the presence of the necessary conditions. And that was seen as a law which is called determinism. Determinism means that whatever happens in the world happens due to the presence of the necessary conditions. So when they began to understand this, people began to doubt the religious dogmas that said the world was created by a God. And during this period, various revolutions took place, like the Marxist revolution, because people didn't believe in the religious dogmas, and so problems came up. So it was at this time that three important philosophers appeared in the United Kingdom. United Kingdom was the three kingdoms, England, Scotland and Ireland. So from England, the philosopher Locke came up, and it was this philosopher Locke who was going on the findings of science. He said, there is no such thing as a mind. We only have a body. Now the psychologists tried to study the mind. That is why it is called psychology. Psych means the mind. But they couldn't find the mind to study. They have been looking for the mind, but they couldn't find the mind. They had only the body. So they started saying, psychology is the study of human behavior, because there was no mind to study. So this Locke started saying there is no such thing as mind. But there was another philosopher in Ireland who was Catholic. And this was Berkeley. He was a bishop. Bishop Berkeley didn't like that idea. So he thought and found an argument, and he said, you are wrong. And he said, there is no such thing as body. There is only the mind. He said, what you call the body is what the mind sees. It is the mind that is able to see the body. So the body is simply a concept in the mind. So there is only the mind. There is no such thing as body. So now the people were confused. Whom are they going to believe? If they believe what Locke says, then there is only the body. And whatever he says is also appearing to be correct. And when they listen to Berkeley, what he says also seems to be correct. But then there is no body, there is only the mind. So this became a problem. So there was another philosopher in Scotland. This was Hume. And Hume said, you are both wrong. one man proved that there is no such thing as mind, and the other man proved that there is no such thing as body. That is the correct thing. There is no body, there is no mind. Then what is it that is there? He said, there is only experience. Experience is the only reality. There is no such thing as mind or body. Of course, there were other philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who was not in the England, Ireland or Scotland, but in France. Now he said, we cannot accept Hume. He said, we can accept what Hume says in the sense that there is only experience. That means there is only seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching and thinking. That is the experience. But what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you think, this is all just a concept. It's not a reality. The reality is outside experience. But we cannot see it or hear it or smell it or taste it or touch it. But the reality is there. And so, he used two words, phenomenon and the noumenon. What he called the phenomenon is what is perceived through the senses. And what he called noumenon is what cannot be seen. The reality that cannot be seen is the noumenon. How is that? But of course, other philosophers came up, like Bertrand Russell, Wittgenstein. These people said, we cannot accept that reality that you are talking about. He said, that reality that you are talking about is all in your imagination. You have never seen or heard or smelled or tasted or touched. You cannot get out of your imagination. There is no reality other than the experience itself. There is only the experience. Now, if we examine the Buddha's statements, there is a sutra where the Buddha begins to speak about this. And that is, the Buddha says, this is the all. This is all. What is it? The eye and what is seen, the ear and what is heard, the nose and what is smelt, the tongue and what is tasted, the body and what is touched, and the mind and what has been thought about. And that is what Hume called the experience. So in other words, experience is all that we can talk about. Now that kind of thinking is what we call experiential thinking. All the objects, the subject as well as the object, is a creation of the process of experiencing. So that way of thinking is what the Buddha spoke of. You see, it's interesting, huh? So it is very important to understand this. Here we see the greatness of the Buddha. So these philosophers like Bertrand Russell, they said, we cannot speak of a thing called truth, because what we call truth is simply a concept which is expressed in the form of a sentence. And we can analyze the sentence to find out whether it is a meaningful statement or a meaningless statement. So we can only talk about a meaningful statement and a meaningless statement, not about the truth. And another philosopher came up. He said, the purpose of human thinking is not to discover truth. The purpose of human thinking is to solve problems. A person can offer a solution to a problem. If a person offers a solution to a problem, we can test it. Use the solution and see whether it solves the problem. If it solves the problem, then we can call it a truth. If it does not solve the problem, then we don't call it a truth. So in other words, we can only talk about solving problems. You see, this is something that the Buddha has already said. The Buddha talks about the Four Noble Truths. Are they truths? They are in the what is called the Alagadupama Sutra. The Buddha says, this truth that I am talking about is like a boat that is used to cross the river. And it can be used to cross the river, but once you have crossed the river, you don't have to carry the boat on your shoulders. You leave the boat. And therefore, you don't have to call it a truth after that. You can only leave it for other people to cross the river. So even the Four Noble Truths is not a truth, but a solution to a problem. And because it solves the problem, it can be called a truth. That is exactly what the Buddha pointed out. So you can see how far evolved the thinking of the Buddha is. So it is very important to understand monks, here the Buddha says monks, one person born into the world is an extraordinary man. What person? A Tathagata. Then it says, monks, the death of one person is to be regretted by many folk. Of what person? Of a Tathagata. Monks, there is one person born into the world who is unique, without a peer, without counterpart, incomparable, unequaled, matchless, unrivaled, best of bipeds. Who is that one person? It is a Tathagata. Monks, the manifestation of one person is the manifestation of a mighty eye, a mighty light, a mighty radiance of six things unsurpassed. It is the realization of the four branches of logical analysis, the penetration of the various elements of the diversity of elements. It is the realization of the fruits of knowledge and release, the realization of the fruits of stream winning, of one's returning, of non-returning, of arahantship, of what person? Of a Tathagata. He is that one person. Monks, I know not of any other single person who is so perfectly keeps rolling the wheel supreme of Dhamma, set rolling by the Tathagata, as the Sariputta. Sariputta monks is the one who is perfectly keeps rolling the wheel of Dhamma. Now it's very important to understand this and the greatness of the Buddha. So I think we have been talking for a long time, and it is good to start with this talk about the greatness of the Buddha. And we can be happy that we are followers of the Buddha. But of course, to be a real follower, we have to start practicing according to the teachings of the Buddha. And it is only by practicing that we can ultimately solve the problem of existence. So if you have any questions to ask, it is the right time to ask questions now.
Bhante, you explain the meaning of the word Tathagata, but it is made of, I think, 3 root words. You only the word Tathagata, I understand, is made of 3 root words, and you only explain the first one, Tat. So you should explain the Tathagata.
You see, that is good that you reminded me of that. Tat means that. But this can be, the other part can be explained in 2 ways. One is called Tat Agata. Agata means come. Gata means going. Gata means really gone. Is the past tense. Gone. Gata. Tat Gata. Or Tat Agata. Agata means come. So, you can take it as come to that. You see? Now that is supposed to be something outside there. But Agata is to come. You see, if that is not there but here, then you are coming here and not there. You see? Tat Agata. But there is another way of saying that. Tata. Instead of just saying Tat, we can also say Tata. Then Tata is that, and Tata Gata means gone to that. But going to that is also coming to that. That is the important thing about this word. Tathagata. Tat Agata. So it's very interesting, that word Tathagata, and also Tattvamasi, that word Tattvamasi. You are that. That is the meaning of Tattvamasi. So these are all based on the teaching of the Buddha. Yeah.
Bhante, if we were to then look at the full word Tathagata, what would be the complete statement to describe the meaning of the full word Tathagata?
Meaning of what?
You have broken Tathagata into 2 different ways.
Yeah.
But now, how do we understand the full meaning of the full word Tathagata?
Well, Tathagata is simply one who has arrived at reality, or the realized one who has realized, one who has arrived at reality. This is very interesting to know these things. Huh? So, if you have no more questions, we can bring this to an end today. And next time we'll also talk about more things about the Buddha, so that we'll have a few talks about the Buddha, so that we begin to understand the greatness of the Buddha. When you are a Buddhist, it is good to know the greatness of a Buddha. So there are a few sutras that we can go through to understand this. So we have a few meetings. How many meetings do you have? 2 meetings more. Then after that we have the... So with those 2 talks we can talk about the Buddha.